Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hi there, and welcome to the Pint-Sized History Podcast. I'm Joe.
Woo, I'm Zack.
And woo, I'm Zack is my comrade for this next fight, this next battle as we step into part 2 of the Iwo Jima conflict. And this is where things really start to shit the fan, am I right?
Shit the fan? Do you mean the shit hits
Makes
the
sense.
fan?
No, shit the fan.
Makes sense. Yeah, we're back in Iwo Jima. We talked a lot last week about the preparations, and I left you on a little cliffhanger, a little tease, if you will.
I
But we're
love a
getting
cliffhanger.
straight back into the action, and we're going to go straight. I'm not going to give Joe any time to introduce the podcast because we're going straight into the first day of the battle. And here we go. The first day, approximately 30,000 US Marines land on Iwo Jima at 8:59 in the morning on February 19th, 1945. Unlike previous landings, the Marines get onto the beach. Typically, they're met at the beach. There's the odd artillery shell that comes their way as they disembark the landing ships, but it's quiet, a bit of a sense of like eeriness and silence. And they begin trudging off the beach. And it's a volcanic island, so it's like really dense sand, and they're getting basically pulled into this horrible volcanic black sand with the 20 kilograms of gear they have. It's really hard to navigate through. They're sinking up to their ankles deep in the sand. The Marines begin trying to make their way inland, and the vehicles are unable to get traction on the surface, and slowly but surely there's still no sign of the enemy, and they begin piling up on this beach and try to make their way up these steep slopes of the hills at the end of the beach. It's incredibly steep. It's a really horrible place, this beach. It's also a very, very narrow beach. So like I said, the Japanese would typically meet them head on, but fire support would typically push them back. So Kuribayashi learns, he knows better. He's seen what other generals have done, what other leaders have done. They've engaged at the beach and they've lost and taken heavy casualties. He knows it's better just to wait. And he waits and waits and waits. And he waits around 30 minutes until American Marines and support equipment and vehicles are piled up higher and higher and higher. There are waves, invasion waves, that come every 5-minute intervals, like 1,000 more Marines, 1,000 more Marines, 2,000 more Marines, 3,000 more Marines coming from these ships, hundreds of ships coming from landing craft, coming from these battleships, I don't know, a mile off the coast. And then the Japanese strike. And artillery positions hidden within this sprawling network of caves and hills, sniper boxes, pillboxes with machine guns, all begin to unload on these unwitting Marine Corps men assembled at the beach. And it is a fucking massacre. It is horrible. The Japanese defenders have spent a year fortifying their defenses, learning their terrain, and they have basically been able to zero in on any part of this island. And this beach turns into a bloodbath. Like, it is a scene from hell. Like, there are thousands of bodies piled up, missing limbs, blood everywhere. It is nasty. Typically, a banzai charge will follow this. You know, they would lay out all their ammunition, they would smash the front line of the Americans, they would charge in with a banzai charge, which is basically fixing bayonets and going in screaming, "Banzai! No, wait, Banzai!" Maybe like that, a bit more. sorry for your ears.
You're not gonna do any Japanese accents at any point in this, are you? You got them written down at any point? Because I can just sense it's inbound.
Let me get my second beer, and then maybe I'll start doing my late Gunray impression from
Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah. It's not offensive to do the Trade Federation accent, is it? It's not the Japanese.
I don't know. Is it offensive to do an accent from a movie that's not trying to be Japanese, but is clearly Japanese?
I say we do it and see how many people unfollow us. We would never do anything without the approval of the Senate.
That's actually quite a good impression of him as well.
It is a good impression, yeah.
I love how, like, the first Star Wars, you know, like, bear in mind, this is a Star Wars that George Lucas specifically wanted to make more for children. Like, he had Jar Jar Binks and he had the kid,
Fucking
kid Anakin. So it's very much
shit.
like more. It's like he wants people to take their kids to see Star Wars. The people that grew up with the 80s
because
Star
it was
Wars.
like for their parents, and now they want to be able to.
Yeah, exactly. He thought that would be a way to market it. So he wanted, because he knew loads of parents that grew up with Star Wars would then want to take their own kids to it. So that's what he was thinking. So he made it intentionally more kid focused. That's why you got the pod race. That's why you've got the Jar Jar. The point I'm making is how ironic it is that George Lucas did all that with children, and then still, because he was so passionate about it, added all this like political intrigue and like senates blockading, trade federations blockading like shipping routes. Like that's the politics. So you've got characters. There's no in the original trilogy. There's no we would never do anything but without the approval of the Senate. It's like that's not a line. There's like in Star Wars, but he wanted it to have this kind of bureaucracy that wasn't in the first one.
So I think I said something about like they would typically do a banzai charge, but like I said before, Kuribayashi forbids banzai charges, and he instructs the defenders to hold their positions, and he says that their battle stations will be their grave sites. The defenders have also not been eating or drinking in days, like they are living on absolute scraps, but they're still summoning this incredible courage to like absolutely batter and weather the American forces. By the end of the first day of fighting, the American casualties numbered around 2,400 men, with Marines having to slowly disable position by position and slowly creep onto the island in meters, not miles, with increasing difficulty each time. The only option for these Marines is just to press ahead. Like they have no option but to get off the beach because it's such a hellhole. They have to get off it. They have to move. They have to go deeper into the island to hit their objectives. By the end of the first day, the Marines have successfully landed 30,000 personnel on the shore. But it's just this like horrible like churning of a body and mass as soon as they disembark. Like it is really like this makes D-Day look like a picnic, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's quite interesting. Like, you know how like many people that aren't that. It's a gateway for many people that are interested in World War II, like watching Saving Private Ryan and seeing D-Day and seeing how brutal it is. And you're like, oh wow, this is actually how brutal it can be. And especially as a kid, you don't really realize it until you see it visualized in front of you, like D-Day. But like when you actually learn about more of the stuff, you're like, man, D-Day was a picnic compared to some of the other amphibious landings. Like, when we talk about amphibious landings today, the one that is often discussed is about if the Chinese were to take Taiwan, they would need to do an amphibious landing and stuff. But like, if you were to compare the two, if you compared how brutal D-Day was to how brutal or difficult it would be for the Chinese to take Taiwan, it's like it's miles. It's so much more difficult, and I don't think amphibious landings for that reason are really difficult to do. And the Americans in the Pacific Front have to do them constantly. Like there's so many different island hopping campaigns where they have to continuously do the amphibious landings, and like I struggle to think about how you would imagine what it would be like at Iwo Jima. There's not footage, but there is dramatization of it. Like I'm sure it is in Letters of Iwo Jima.
Like one of the first films I've seen of like World War II, or like that's not from the Allied perspective. It's from the perspective of the Japanese defenders, which is a really big rarity. Like you don't get this viewpoint. Like, Clint Eastwood does a great job in like capturing that, and you get from their perspective like how dire the situation is, but how willing they are to go to these extreme lengths. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And but I guess my point is just like that. Even the examples that you'll see, like I say, the Pacific, which if is a TV show if you haven't seen, that's made by Steven Spielberg and stuff, and they did Band of Brothers. It was their sequel. And that has an episode where you see Iwo Jima, and it is brutal. But the stories that you hear from Iwo Jima, similar to D-Day, it's actually worse. Like what you see on Saving Private Ryan or the Pacific about these amphibious landings, it's actually worse. Like the conditions, the lack of humanity, the brutality is worse. It's so much more horribly disgusting.
I guess the point is like the Nazis, the Germans haven't really faced amphibious landings before. They face it in Sicily slightly. Yeah, they face it in Italy again when they land.
That wasn't the Germans. That was the Italians that faced it.
Yeah, but the Germans,
and then the Germans came and helped.
Divisions and units there as well.
Right.
But like I guess they really only face it like full on personally in Normandy.
Yeah, exactly.
The first time. But the Japanese have faced it 4 or 5 times already. So like
experienced.
The Americans are owning their skills to invade and launch an amphibious landing, but the Japanese are owning their skills to defend an amphibious landings. And there are so many lessons that the Japanese learn from Iwo Jima, and Kuribayashi has learned from the generals before him who defended these other islands like Saigon, Tarawa, and Guadalcanal, and he's seen that happen. And both sides are getting better, but it just means the bloodshed isn't like decreasing. It's still getting worse and worse and worse. I guess the more important thing is that if the defender's getting better, you have something to worry about, because the attacker can only control so much in this instance. Like it is. It kind of
it all depends on the defender. Like it, in an ideal scenario,
and the naval bombardment beforehand. Well, the attacker can take measures. Like,
that's true.
They can absolutely obliterate the defenses by pouring on like masses of metal and shrapnel and heat onto these tunnels and these networks in the mountains, and they failed to do that in Iwo Jima, and that's why it's such a horrible bloodbath.
That's true. I guess my point, the only point I was going to make there was that in this specific scenario, the attackers ideally want the defenders to not realize that's the beachhead they're going to, and to have literally barely any fighting, to be able to get on as quickly as possible and efficiently move all their transports on, and to be able to then, once they've established a beachfront, go forward. That's the ideal amphibious landing. It's the position of the defender to make it as impossible for that to happen as much. So you're right, from the Germans' perspective, most of their troops were stationed in a different part of France. As a defenders, if you want to make this as brutal as possible, then you need to get everything right. From the Japanese perspective, they've had so much training, so much practice, and they know where the beachheads are going to be. And so when the moment comes, they are able to make it as brutal as possible. And it means that you now suddenly, with Iwo Jima, have the worst conditions possible if you're the attacking side, which is obviously America in this exact example. It's really fascinating how battle tactics work for amphibious landings. I'm sure Taiwan have heavily researched, practiced, taken a look at all these different amphibious landings, because especially with the island hopping of the Pacific front, there's so many examples and so many things you can learn from if you're worried that a nation is going to attack in Southeast Asia.
I recently watched a video about Taiwan and their battle readiness, and it sounds like they are still very far off being able to be battle ready for a Chinese war. Beijing missed their opportunity to invade and have a very easy experience to do so about a year ago. If they invaded after the Ukraine war happened, when there was probably less US willingness to get involved, or when Trump initially got into power and he was America first, they probably had quite an easy time bit. But now Taiwan are putting in orders for HIMARS rockets, which are really successful in Ukraine. They're expanding their ability to hit across hundreds of miles of Chinese homeland territory. They're really taking good steps to now solidify their defensives, and they're getting far more investment and focus from the Americans, who are positioning all their feet in the Indo-Pacific. So that day probably will come in the next 5 years. And it will be a crazy, crazy day.
Be very scary. Like you say, the Taiwanese military have not been well enough prepared. Their military is not ready. The Americans are pivoting to the Pacific, but regardless, we don't even know if the Americans would help the Taiwanese or if they just try to block China. So it's not only scary, but it's interesting how you can really parallel
I don't know
how they would deal with it.
I don't want to make political assumptions, but you'd have thought Trump is just so anti-China that he would just use an opportunity to bring the Chinese economy down, the Chinese military down, which is it's basically all US foreign policy is staying the biggest dog in the world, and they can do that very easily by really reinforcing Taiwan. But let's go back to the Battle of Iwo Jima, because
let's keep going.
So the battle is bloody and confined and merciless. The Marines having to go step by step into these pillboxes and positions and fortified bunkers, throw grenades into them, kill Japanese retreating, or smoke them out with flamethrowers. It is horrible. I can't imagine what Iwo Jima veterans would say about it coming out of it. And same for Okinawa afterwards, which is maybe as horrible, not as confined, but still equally horrible. And the Pacific series does a great job of showing this, by the way. You should really give it a watch if you haven't before. Just to give some examples, some figures, I do like to bring in the statistics. Lieutenant Frank Wright of the 1st 28th Marines had started the attack with 60 men on the first day, and found that only 2 of his men were still standing after the first few hours. Lieutenant Wesley Bates reached his objective on the other side of the island, but lost around 3/4 of his men. He might have had the same size regiment, around 60 men. He returns with 12. So it is a horrible human cost for both sides. The Japanese are probably faring better at this point in the day, because they are just repelling the initial invasion, which is the easiest part of the day to repel, I guess. And also many American officers are paying the ultimate price. Many American officers are dying. The officers of the Marine Corps have been hollowed out by this first day. In some areas of the island, Marines are running into carefully laid Japanese minefields, and they have to wait for engineers to carefully carve way through them. And fortified positions on the island become really famous. There are positions like the Meat Grinder and the Bloody Gorge and Hill 382 and the Amphitheater. These are all code names given to sections of the island which are seeing this intense combat. In the Meat Grinder section particularly, nearly 850 Americans have died just fighting for this small section of this tiny island, which is madness. And the first day comes to an end, and Marines are ordered to dig in for the night. And the beach is still something out of a nightmare. Mortars and artillery rounds are still getting let off, hitting, in some cases, 2 aid stations are hit on the beach. So you can imagine that is horrible. Just to make things worse than they possibly could be, you're bringing all your wounded and all your people dying to an aid station, and then it's hit by a massive artillery shell, and I can't imagine what that would look like. It must be haunting. By the end of the first day, the Marines had achieved only one of their objectives, which is to drive. It's a fairly big objective. It was to drive across the island and split the Japanese in two. It's actually an enormous objective. The main objectives are to take the airfields, but splitting the island in two gave such a strategic victory because, like, it means that one side is cut off from the main base, and that side is Mount Suribachi. It's now basically on the south side of the island, and the north side where the headquarters is, which has all the supplies and the ammunition and the food or whatever they have left. Those people on the south side of the island and Mount Suribachi are completely cut off from resupply and reinforcement. And apparently on the command ship on the USS Eldorado, Holland Howling Mad Smith, who was a general in the Marine Corps, says the following: "I don't know who he is, but the Japanese general running this show is one smart bastard." That's what he says.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
At least he knows. Quite interesting, I guess, because it's like, I feel like so much, you don't really know often the tactics of the person opposite you until they've done them. But even then, sometimes you're not really aware of how it's all been played out. But I guess from his perspective, he's just seeing how much, unlike in the other campaigns, unlike in the other amphibious landings, they've really fucking smashed into them and given them all their worth. So, yeah, I guess I'm not surprised that this general knows completely what's up.
Also, I wonder how much information they have. I guess are they getting relayed to constantly? Are they?
Yeah.
Because there's probably quite widespread radio use at this time, so they're probably able to say, we've advanced into Charlie Sector, we have 2 Marine units there, we're pushing forward, we're taking casualties. So he's probably getting live updates about how badly the men are getting hit and how horrible the fight is. And he's like, fuck me, this guy's good. It's quite weirdly humble and immodest, isn't it?
Fair play.
In what is a horrible, grueling theatre where they're not dying, but hundreds of poor young men are.
Yeah. Always the teenagers.
Yeah. What's that famous quote? I don't know who said it. It might have been Sun Tzu or something, or some famous military leader. But it's old men wage war, young people give their lives for it. It's something like that.
That's it. You butcher that quote.
Yeah.
It's like,
you know what? Let me.
You've absolutely butchered that.
I'm gonna use my one time and Google it.
One time.
So it's Herbert Hoover. I don't know who Herbert Hoover is, but it's old men declare war.
President.
Oh, is it? Okay, the phrase is old men declare war, but it is youth that must fight and die.
I feel like there's other quotes similar to that.
Yeah. Battle of Iwo Jima. The first day is over in our minds together here today. Listen to
Thank God.
Yeah, what a horrible day. Can't state it enough. But unfortunately for the Marines, it's not going to get any easier. Progress in this battle is going to remain incredibly hard to come by. They're learning, though, slowly on the day, and they're adapting, and they resort to flamethrowers, much more widespread and far more widespread use of grenades to dislodge enemy positions, and the tanks are now getting into the fights. And particularly, there's a modified version of the Sherman tank, which is the main American medium-sized tank at this point, which is now being equipped with a flamethrower, and it's doing some of the best work in the battle. It's basically literally spewing napalm at Japanese positions. It's a horrible way to go. It's also getting very close quarters as the attackers are beginning to battle through this vast network of tunnels, and brave men are going into these tunnels to try and root out defenders. They're sealing off one side.
So they're in the hills now. Sorry, they're in the hills, and they're sneaking
they're pushing
through these tunnels, trying to get
southwards
to the top.
into Mount Suribachi, which is that it has a defense network set up there, but that is more hilly terrain. And on the north side, there's this extensive network of tunnels, and they're going into these tunnels. They're blowing up one entrance to it. They're pushing onwards, and because the way they're constructed is really complex, really well honeycombed, very, very innovatively designed, they'll push through one entrance, and then up behind them comes from another entrance to a tunnel they haven't seen before. They haven't sealed off the exit to that tunnel. Comes a unit of Japanese soldiers, which rake the American lines, and in some cases extinguish rake them with machine gun fire.
Right.
In some cases dismantle and extinguish entire American units just by coming up in their rear, surprising them and laying into them.
Yeah, the idea of tunnel warfare, trying to climb a mountain by
caves,
going
tunnels,
through these
fuck that shit.
Sneaky cave that honestly sounds horrible.
The fight is getting horrible, but the battle is beginning to turn. More equipment's getting on the island, they're getting off the beaches, the morale of the invaders is growing, and the perilous position of the defenders is getting worse and worse. Defeat seems kind of imminent. On 23rd of February, Lieutenant Harold G. Schreier leads a patrol up the side of Mount Suribachi. He had orders to take the mountain and plant a flag at the summit, and at around 10:20 a.m. that day, this scene is captured by a Marine Corps photographer, and cheers echoed around the island as the flag is raised on the top of Mount Suribachi. but the fighting was still not over. A flag is raised, but fighting is not over.
I was going to say this is one of the most famous images from World War II.
It's possibly the most famous image of the entire Pacific Theater. But there is one horribly funny thing about this situation, this picture. So they've had this picture. There's this horrible battle going on. But later that day, another patrol was ordered. This time with an even bigger flag. And this photo, they basically got another patrol to go back up Mount Suribachi with a much bigger flag, so they could have a picture with this like huge flag rather than the smallish flag they had before. And this photo is eventually used in the 7th War Bond drive. And,
wow! So there were casualties for the first one.
They're on patrols. There might have been casualties. I don't know specifically or not. But what I will say about the 3 of the 6 men photographed in this second picture, which became the main picture of the 7th War Bond drive, the picture we all have seen, the famous one. This is the second picture. It's the second iteration. But 3 of the 6 men photographed in this picture were later killed in action days after raising the flag. So only 3 of the men who planted this flag actually survived.
Which come back to America to see the photo that has become synonymous with
they
with
became
the
celebrities. They took part in War One selling tours after the battle.
Really? Wow. I didn't know that. So we haven't really explained what the photo is. If you're just listening to the audio, it's the photo of the 6, did you say, Americans that are on the top of a hill, and they're all 6 soldiers are pushing collectively to raise this American flag, with it drooping behind them, and it's got this kind of deserty landscape beyond it. Yeah, I mean, if you can picture it in your mind, it's the photo that you think of.
It's not deserty. It's mountainous, horrible terrain. It's rocky. So Mount Suribachi, the south side of the island, has basically been taken now. Virtually all the defenders inside this network of tunnels on the mountain and caves are killed. But the Japanese are still holding on to the north side of the island, and it's proving even harder to advance through. The Japanese are probably down to around 7,000 men now from the 21,000 men they had. And Kobayashi still has roughly 8 battalions, a tank regiment, 2 artillery, and 3 mortar battalions. Still got quite a sizable force defending this much smaller side of the island, which is far more defensively protected. I mentioned the meat grinder earlier, one of the places which saw a lot of fighting. And the Marines are just having to go through these horribly fortified areas, again, position by position, in this maze of obstacles. And tanks are proving a bit less effective because the terrain's getting really horrible. There's mines throwing them up in the air and fiery blazes. But there's literally eyewitness reports of tanks literally being whooshed right up in the air. Units getting ambushed on their flanks as they're progressing deeper into defences. And every step forward warrants a massive human loss. Hill 382 was one of these positions. And it was only after an ingenious night attack, because typically the Marines would sleep through the night, dig in, wait for the next day to begin fighting. The commander of the Marine regiment decides for a night attack, and it's incredibly brutal. But what they do is they push onto the hill in the night and kill loads of the defenders in their sleep. Before they can even pick up arms, basically, to defend themselves. So despite the banzai charges, the Japanese decide to try and retake the hill that the Americans just took. And on the 8th of March, they have a frontal charge. And this is something that Kuribayashi has outlawed, but they do it anyway. Captain Sumaji Inoue and 1,000 men charged the American lines, killing 19 Marines and inflicting over 300 casualties. But in return, 800 Japanese men had died in that charge. That is insane.
Wow.
That's literally why Kuribayashi doesn't want to do this banzai charge, because he has the fatality rate, not just the casualty rate, the sheer fatality rate is unbelievably high, because they are charging head-on into fortified positions, defensive positions, with their bayonets drawn. It is madness. So by the 16th of March, 25 days after the landings, the battle again is winding down, and the Marines had broadly secured the island, except from Kuribayashi's main stronghold in a gorge. The remnants of the Japanese force under Kuribayashi settled into what was called by the Americans Death Valley, this gorge. And right up to the very last, the Marines had to throw everything at the defenders to flush them out. On the night of March 25th, 1945, and into the early hours of 26th of March, the final 300-strong banzai charge against an encampment of American soldiers nearby erupts in the early dark hours of the morning. By the time the sun had risen, the fighting was over, and while 50 Americans had been killed, 262 Japanese soldiers from the 300-strong force that launched this charge had died in the fighting. It is reported that Kuribayashi himself leads this charge. And unlike the traditional banzai charges, it was conducted in silence. typically they would scream and they would go Banzai, but this time I imagine to extract the most amount of casualties on the American side, they do it as quietly and tactfully as they can, and they did sneak up on the Americans.
Did you say in the night as well?
Yeah, it's in the night, in the early hours of the morning. So like,
mate, can you imagine how scary that would be if you're used? I mean, I don't think you'd ever be used to Banzai charges, but imagine you're like, what you've seen is them screaming, but instead this time they're actually just on you and they're like fighting you, and then they start screaming. And it's dark as well. Obviously, that would be insanely scary.
It's quite weird how like Banzai charges had prevailed until 1945 in the Japanese army, because because I guess like you look at it from the outside perspective and you think like, why are they doing this? Like, why are they just running at the lines with their bayonets drawn and just like firing?
It's very World War One,
very World War One. And I think it comes down to this like Bushido spirit, this like warrior kamikaze strength of divine wind spirit that the Japanese have, going down in a glorious battle, very Viking-esque, like going down this like glorious blaze of fury is like better than just like to die holding a position. And while it is reported that Kuribayashi led the charge, there are conflicting accounts. It's very unlikely, very, very unlikely that an officer of his rank would have led the charge and been involved. Typically what happens is when frontline soldiers charge in a Banzai charge, the high-ranking officers would be in their headquarters committing seppuku at the same time. It's really hard as a Western European to like be able to kind of align with that thought process and really think about it. Like, it's also like obviously a thinking of philosophy of the times. Like there is this far more like, I always talk about the value of life, but that is clearly not enshrouded and enshrined by some countries during this time. And like the British have a doctrine which is men over equipment, like men over anything. If our men are in trouble, we will get them out. The manpower is far more important than the war effort, basically. And it's like where you get at Dunkirk, and you get that on our retreat in North Africa. Like you always have this focus from the British to save the man and not the mission. In Japan, it is like save. And in Russia as well, it's Soviet Union. Sorry, it's save. Complete the mission, complete the concept, complete the philosophy. The man is expendable. So it's just like it's ideologically opposed.
But also on top of that, it's also the fact that I think it's really difficult in our Western minds to kind of I can't comprehend the idea of the officer committing suicide, obviously
surrendering.
No. Surrender is off the table. If you're Japanese, surrender is off the table. So while that's already difficult to get your head around, what I more mean is if you're the one telling your troops, this is it, we're going to go out in one big final Banzai charge, we're going to give our life for what we believe in. What I find even more like ridiculous to kind of comprehend is why aren't they going out with them if they believe it? Because, and I'm not saying that as if they're cowards. They're not cowards because they're committing seppuku. It's their fate. For them, they feel like they've lost their mission, so they naturally have to commit seppuku for them to be accepted in society again. It's an honor thing, and I think like that's what I find even more difficult. It's like it's one thing to go out in a blaze of glory because it's like screw it. We're saving the mission, we're not saving the man, we will fight to the very death. That's on its own. But it's the fact that you've commanded your troops to do it, but because of the other honor system, which is also an intrinsic part of Japanese culture, you also have to commit seppuku at the same time. Yeah. Like that is what I find bizarre. It's like if you were really like, this mission matters above any of our lives, all of you in a Western culture would go. You would all fight. But it's like there's this hierarchy of like what they all consider important, which I find I find really difficult to like wrap my head around, I guess.
Yeah. I guess at the same time, like the generals are probably elderly men, so that they're not as maybe physically fit as a younger. It's a very loose thing, but like
that's true. I guess there is more to it.
They're like the old brass, aren't they? Like it's probably expected of them to not be in that charge. But
true.
At 9 a.m. on 26th of March, the battle is officially declared as being over. There are still some Japanese guerrilla holdouts, like you said earlier. I think there's still pockets of them that fight for like 6 months onwards, like odd units, like just in a deep bunker somewhere in the middle of a cave system that just like keep firing, keep on. There's still casualties, but the fight is essentially finished on 26th of March. The final death toll was around 18,000 Japanese soldiers killed in action, with around 1,000 prisoners being taken, and almost 7,000 Marines had died during the battle. But importantly, 20,000 Marines were wounded. So roughly 29,000 Marine casualties of the battle. The main reason for the fight, like I said, was to secure these emergency landing areas for damaged bombers and to take these Japanese airfields out of service. But really, it is exorbitant, like, waste of human life. I'll explain why I'm saying that. So the battle teaches us, like, really good lessons about preliminary bombardments and teaches the Japanese lessons about defending islands and how to defend the beach landing, amphibious landings, like we said earlier. But the actual justification of the battle for the Americans is to provide a base for P-51 Mustangs to serve as long-range fighter escorts to B-29 superfortresses. In reality, only 10 missions were flown from Iwo Jima. 10 missions in maybe what was hundreds and thousands.
Wow.
Of missions. The early warning system, which they were targeting Iwo Jima for, which was radioing back to the home islands, saying that the B-29s were on their way, was redundant anyway, because there was a nearby island called Rota, which was an island never invaded and had.
But did they know that?
I don't know. I would imagine they
because I get what you're saying, but if they weren't fully aware, weren't fully sure of where that communication were coming from, then at least I understand it more partially. Like, come on, like, I would say that there's any way.
I would say based on the fact that there's a split in historical analysis about this, that they might have known, or they might have had some intelligence. I wouldn't have thought that the US would be. I think you don't want to underestimate US intelligence, because like it is top caliber. Like, they've cracked the signals of the Japanese really early in the war. Also, we're working with them, and we probably have at this time the best intelligence services in the world, so we probably understand this quite well as well. We're fighting the Japanese too, so we probably understand. So they probably have some information about this. So there's this other island, which basically means that Iwo Jima is redundant, and they've still done it anyway. So let's just take it for a fact that this is just for my own argument's sake here. The last feature was to provide a place for emergency bombers that were damaged flying over the home islands to have a place to refuel and resupply. And the US figures suggest that the island saves the lives of up to 25,000 air crewmen who would otherwise have had to have done emergency landings in the sea, or ditched, or flown somewhere and been shot down. But according to historians, it's a massively over-exaggerated figure. I think the most generous figure they give for this number, with the 25,000 estimate being what the US gave, is 12,500. So that's being as generous as possible. Say it saved 12,000 more lives, but realistically it's like probably an absolute fraction of that number. So the worth of the battle is really disputed. I personally don't think it's worthwhile, but in terms of like the overall campaign and the strategic campaign, maybe there's some elements as you can dub it to be true.
Yeah.
The problem is everyone will say that human life is unnecessary. The waste of human life is unnecessary.
It's a debate, right? Like it is debatable. There are many examples in history where after you've learned the hindsight, is actually in fact not that. And Dresden, for example, when the Allied bombing, or really the British bombing of Dresden, the city of Dresden, at the time it might have seemed like it was the right thing to do, and then afterwards you're like, oh my god, this is actually just really bad, and it really was not worth it in any capacity whatsoever. At least this one is somewhat debatable from what you're saying. It seems like at least there is an argument that it was worth it.
There is an argument, but like, yeah. The question is more about the significance of that argument, the weight of the argument. There is certainly an argument.
It's funny as well, because the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are arguably the biggest ones that people debate to this day. And that's obviously the Pacific Front. That's also this exact time period. It's interesting that you get so many examples in World War II, and specifically the Pacific Front, when you debate, was it really worth it? Can you even argue if one side is worth it more than the other as time goes on? Like, was Hiroshima and Nagasaki worth it? Yeah. Is this worth it? It's something that we'll never really have the answer to.
I personally think that based on Iwo Jima and based on Okinawa, it's really hard to like be a proponent of nuclear warfare or atomic warfare. But in terms of like sheer quantity and sheer numbers, like atomic bombings would have saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives on both sides. It's horrible destruction, and it's put the world on a course of like basically nuclear armament and like the race to bomb, the race for massive bombs. And you've got like the Tsar bombers the Russians have, which could basically wipe out half of the UK if they wanted to use it, if it was operational.
The whole thing.
But like, if the invasion of the home islands of Japan followed in the same ilk as this, the casualties of both civilians and soldiers would have been unbelievably immense, and you would have seen situations like Iwo Jima on like a 30, 40, 50 times grander scale, and that would have been horrible. I'm
interested that you've said that, because, and this is my personal experience, so I'm not like saying that this is the group synopsis, but recently the thing, more often than not, and I'm not like I've seen much of this, but recently I've noticed that I'm hearing more arguments that it actually wasn't worth it. I'm hearing more and more arguments that in reality Nagasaki and Hiroshima were probably too extreme. I've always been of the opinion overkill. I've been of the opinion similar to you that from what I've read and from what I've seen, that it actually probably kind of was worth it. So I'm interested that we both seem to have the same opinion on it. But yeah,
I mean, my main justification for all that is because, like, even after the first atomic bombing, Japanese still didn't surrender immediately. They still were like, oh, let's keep going, fuck you know. To be fair to them, they didn't have good intelligence on it. They didn't know exactly what it was. They didn't know what happened. They just like, yeah, it must have been the same thing that happened to Tokyo. It must have been like just, you know, an air raid like that happened in the fireball in Tokyo. So they didn't exactly know. So they were kind of like making a decision without due diligence. But I have one more thing to cover before I end this episode. But before we end, I want to touch on, because I've talked a lot about Japanese bravery, and I don't think I've given enough credit to the American soldiers. And I wanted to give one example of one American soldier at the Battle of Iwo Jima to provide a good contrast, because like the bravery on both sides is immense. We frequently try and put ourselves in positions of people on the ground and try and think about what it would be like, and this is an insane story. So I wanted to talk to you briefly about a person called John Basilone. And John Basilone, you might know, Joe, is one of the main characters of the Pacific. One of my favourite series. It's a follower to the Band of Brothers series. John Basilone was a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, and he performed heroic acts in Guadalcanal, which is a battle that happened in 1942. He had a machine gun on the go for 3 days and nights without sleep, rest or food, and maintained continual fire against Japanese forces, holding a defensive line against 3,000 attackers with 2 sections of machine guns until relief arrived. He was awarded the Medal of Honor and embarked on a war bond tour. But while he was on this tour, he wanted to get back to the fighting. His friends were dying. He knew they were getting shipped out, but he was a celebrity. He was to sell war bonds back in the States, but he wants to go back out there. And he asked to go back out, but he was declined. So eventually he re-enlisted back into the Marine Corps, and he met his wife there, and they got married on July 10th, 1944. And he requested to return to the fleet, knowing about the price his comrades were paying in this horrible Pacific War. And he was approved and signed to C Company, serving as a machine gun section leader in the invasion of Iwo Jima. While at the battle, his unit got pinned down by heavily fortified blockhouses. Basilone made his way around the side of Japanese positions on his own until he was on top of the blockhouse and attacked it literally solo with grenades, demolitions, until he directed a flamethrower squad and a former trainee to suppress and hit the blockhouse with fire and bullets. He single-handedly essentially destroyed this strongpoint and its garrison, firing machine gun from the hip at escaping Japanese soldiers. Basilone fought his way towards Airfield No. 1 to get reinforcements, aiding a tank that was trapped in the enemy minefield while under mortar and artillery barrages. He guided this tank out of the area and was reported to have been hit by mortar and small arm fires after he directed the tank to safety. He was eventually killed from being hit by mortar and small arms fire. His actions helped push through the Japanese defences and get Marines off the beach during the early stages of the invasion, and he was awarded posthumously the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. And that is where we'll leave the Battle of Iwo Jima.
He is in the Pacific, which, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, is an episode that actually talks about Iwo Jima. So you see him in Iwo Jima doing some of the stuff that Zack just mentioned. And I think he's one of the most decorated US soldiers, or at least was at that point, because he'd received 2 of the biggest awards that you could get, or a few of the biggest
Medal of Honor
that you could get.
There's very few Medal of Honor recipients. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, and he, when he died as a married man, was 28, which makes him younger than both of us.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Which is mind-blowing to me. I mean, this is a true American hero, an Italian-American hero as well. That was, I mean, the thing is, I don't want to get like too like glossy about him, because it's kind of like I'm like glazing this beautiful all-American hero, but at the same time there were so many other American heroes on the day that will never hear the light of day, because this is how war is. Yep. You hear about these individual stories, but there's so many accounts in World War II of these insane, moments, and you're never really going to hear them.
I completely agree, but this is the way I view it. I think the beauty of it is that this represents, it's emblematic of like wider American bravery and heroism during the Pacific War, because it's very easy for us to like kind of look back on it with like, trying to be very balanced and talk about the Japanese being very brave and courageous in their valor and holding positions and going banzai charges and the honor they have. But like the Americans are going into literally the hardest of environments. Like it is not easy, like we said earlier, to push into the Pacific Islands and attack those beaches in this like some of the climate is like incredibly humid, very hot.
Yeah.
Some climate, like in Iwo Jima, the climate is very cold actually, like this time of year.
Yeah. Even without the conditions, it's terrifying. It's terrifying war in general, but the conditions and also, you know how scary the Japanese are because of how much they won't. They will fight to the death. So you know that they're going to fight to the death. So to psych yourself up to push forward in those conditions is terrifying. I have to say, like, this is me being really honest now and being very frank. There are many things with America, and if there's any Americans listening at this point, then I guess I'm speaking to you. There are many things, especially in the last few years and, the last year specifically, that make it a bit awkward. And sometimes I feel quite frustrated at how America acts on a world stage at times. But never, ever has that ever changed my opinion about how Americans acted during World War II. Because, like, hearing the stories, I feel pride as a British person. Almost, I mean, I have relations to America. I have family that live there, but I'm not American at all myself. And I feel proud hearing some of the stories that I hear and read and you tell me about Iwo Jima and the Pacific Island hopping and D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, where you do feel really, really impressed and proud to be an American. That's why I love shows like The Pacific, which are quite glossy. They're, maybe a little bit propaganda at times towards Americans, but they still drive to the heart of how brutal war is and how much you have to step up. So you hear stories about John Basilone, and it's really nice. And I feel proud that someone like this was fighting on the same side as myself. Well, my family, rather.
World War II is truly America at its best. Like, they are. It's hard to say that someone could be at their best during war. I believe the British Army and the way we served.
Well, we've said before during the Battle of Britain that we believe that this was Britain's best moment.
And it truly was, like, sense of like the grand defenders of democracy and freedoms across the world, specifically in the Pacific, and launching themselves into these horrible conditions across the Pacific, a place which is very far from them, very far from the American homeland, but in the interests of greater democratic freedoms across the kind of the Pacific is just monumental.
Yeah,
it's a shame. I don't want to spoil it with this sentence, but like, it is a shame that we're moving to a world that's far more fractured, because clearly when Europe and America and the world is kind of at one and in sync, it's a much better place, I think.
Regardless of anything else, regardless of how things might be at this moment, and regardless how things might go in the future, I will always be proud of how Americans acted in World War II. And when you talk about a story like John Basilone, it makes me feel really happy that this was someone that was on the same side as my ancestors. And
fuck being on the other side from John Basilone.
Yeah, I don't want to fight that guy. I think it's nuts.
Thank you very much for listening to our episode on Iwo Jima. I hope you enjoyed it and found it enlightening and a bit of a different. I don't think we've really covered the Pacific as much as maybe we should do. We've done the Pearl Harbor a little bit, but I think this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I'm glad I finally got the opportunity to. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it, Joe. Importantly.
Yes, absolutely. I loved it. Thank you very much for finally taking us through Iwo Jima and the Pacific Front, because I know you've been dying to do it. We will see you guys in the next episode. It's my turn, and I don't know what we're going to do, but I'm looking forward to choosing. I might do something Italian. I might do Roma or something. I've got the feeling we're going to do something like that. Nice. But all right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.